As you guys may or may not know, I am working on a Vital Pack currently. I want to make roughly 100 presets that I can sell over on my Gumroad page, and I need to do that before the 20th of April because I plan on doing another sale. So I'm going to be filming a couple of different sound design videos where I'm just going to be making a pad from scratch, and you guys get to follow along and see how I make my presets. So here we are in a very simple project. I just have a kick and bass in here. There's some other stuff in here as well that's just experimentation from earlier sessions. I'm just going to put in a Vital over here and we're going to start off the sound design. The idea that I have is to use all 3 different oscillators in 3 different ways and kind of make grid synths out of them. In order to do that, I'm going to load a wavetable in the first one here. I'm just going to go with something from the factory pack maybe. Let's see what we get. See if we can find something interesting. This is just noise. This might be cool. We can do a little bit of phase disperse here. That looks like a nice tone. We get something cool out of that, but I would like it to be higher. Something like that. And the way I'm planning on triggering this is to just use the LFO over here. So we're going to make a shape that looks somewhat like this. We'll turn the smooth all the way down. And then we can assign that to the volume. Now we get that. This is going to go through a high pass filter over here. Let's make it 12 dB per or 24 dB per octave. So we just get that sharp higher frequency there. So that's going to be our first tone. What I want to do now is I actually want to use it in an FM setup for this one here. So FM oscillator A here. Set the phase all the way down. Get a nice gritty sound out of that. And we can make a different pattern for this. Here I'm just going to make a couple of plugs. Assign it like that. And get something like that. And then for the final one, I want to do kind of like a squelch thing. So I'll make this actually, one beat here. And I'm gonna make a shape like this. Is that in the right place? I do think that is in the right place. This all makes sense once it plays with the thing here. I believe what we have now is like the start of a squelch here, in that it's just kind of like the modulation that you would put on a squelch, but we obviously need to make the squelch itself. For that, we're going to need a bandpass. So oscillator 3 is going to go through that bandpass over here. We need to probably modulate this in some kind of way. It's very quiet now, so I'm going to drive it in here. Maybe if we... Okay, what I'm ending up doing is just turning these down a little bit to compensate here. And we'll find a way to make it louder later. We'll assign it to the pitch as well. And then in the pitch, I'm just going to move this down so it goes down faster. Let's give this 2 voices here, maybe 3 voices like this. And that's a nice starting pattern. I want to add a little bit of processing here, something like this. Just glues it nicely together. And then we'll have our final high pass here. Let's add that on top of the kick and bass. It actually needs to be an A sharp for it to be in the key of the track. What I'm thinking of doing is making it so that the high pass filter goes after this plug over here. Maybe it doesn't really matter. Let's try it like this. We'll have oscillator 3 go through here, and then we take input from filter 1 over here. We don't high pass these two over here anymore, meaning that the high pass is just responsible for the squelch sound. Because what I feel like is happening is that the lower mids of the squelch are a little bit too dominant. So we can take those out by using a 12 dB per octave high pass like this maybe. As you can see, one of the other things that I did to make this patch a little bit more interesting is to add some movement through this random sine interpolation over here. And that is just set to the frequency of this bandpass over here. Other than that, we want some other processing as well. In terms of the delay, I'm thinking of just using a normal 1/8 node. I think that will work best in terms of the delay setting for this sound. I like to dial back my feedback a little bit when I'm setting up the macros. Of course, this is going to be a preset, so we're going to set up all of the macros for this. And this will be the ambience. One of the things that you have to think about when you're making presets is this stuff over here. So I'm going to set this to the pitch bend of 12, and then you'll only be able to play one voice of this sound, so one note at a time. It overrides the note there. You can also add a little bit of glide into it. Add the legato here. And now you can glide around if you want to with this patch. We'll add our reverb to the ambience over here. Let's add it to the time here as well, so that it becomes a little bit longer. Now I get something like that. Finally, we need to add our other effects to it. The main effects, the main things that we need is stuff for the 3 macros over here. So one thing that I'm thinking of doing is playing around a little bit with the waveforms of these, mainly of the second one over here. Let's, for example, see what happens if we just get ourselves let's do like a rounded square like this. It doesn't really seem to matter that much. Maybe you can play with some of these over here. Really, the main influence just seems to come from the FM amount. And I was hoping that we could do it in other ways, but this means that the tonality of the sound is just going to come from that FM here. So this will be tone, and that will be shifting kind of like the tonality of the main sound of the patch, because the middle one is kind of like the main one, the one that plays the most. What we can do is try maybe a few of these here. So the formant may be nice to just up that. Let's see what happens if we add that to the tone as well. That does sound really nice, but I'd like to think that this kind of movement is different from the actual tonality of the sound. So maybe we want to have this on a separate macro over here. And we'll call this smile, I guess. Because it's kind of like the synth itself smiling. It just becomes brighter and happier and like higher in terms of the frequencies that it uses. So what I would like to do is find another tool here that may be useful for actually changing the tonality of the sound here We might even go with a phase disperse on this one. Or we can try the random amplitude over here. Just kind of select an area where we get some nice amplitudes, like in the middle somewhere. Here. And then just allow the user to move it a little bit. I mean, that's kind of it. That's kind of where we want to go here. Let's enable this one again, the squelch again, so that we can hear the whole thing in context. It might be nice to have a volume for the squelch so that people can turn it off. And then what I'll do is I'll also set this to the pitch amount. And then in the modulator over here, this is the one for the pitch, I believe. Yeah, you can hear that with a matrix set like this, it kind of becomes more plucky because it goes down later, I guess. Oh, this is how fast, if we set it halfway, it will already be very high in terms of the amount of pitch modulation that happens. Okay, yeah, so the pitch modulation doesn't extend a lot when you turn up the squelch. It just, for the first part, is mainly the volume that you don't hear. And you can see over here, there's already a very strong pitch modulation overall. So that's good. That's an interesting and useful knob. Maybe I want to do a little bit more with the smile here. Just overall add like a phaser maybe to it. A very nice high phaser. So something like this. And we'll add that to the smile here. We'll add the mix to it as well. So that just adds a little bit. And then it's also going to move up the cutoff of the high pass here. Could be a little bit louder once we get so high. So I'm just going to drive it here. That's useful. I like to check different combinations of these kind of things here. The main tone doesn't change too much. So maybe we should give it a little bit more FM power maybe. Here now we have a tonal shift that is actually useful. This is why you always check these kind of things afterwards when you're finalized with the patch if the modulation is actually useful. Let's see with the smile as well. Now we should have a wider range of tonalities even when the smile is turned up. I mean, it doesn't do as much as I would have hoped. Maybe the format is a little too high here. I think this may mainly be the tonality of the lowest part here. Now there's a little bit more of a tonal change even with higher smile values. Okay, so finally what I'm going to do is I want to set up a way that you can manually control the filter over here, because that's really all of the main movement of the sounds that is currently randomized, and it's nice to have control over that. So I'm just going to set this to the macro here and then set this to the same kind of level here. So this is 55 point something. We can just, take this value over here and then enter it in here. And now these two have the same modulation setup, but because the mod wheel is now tied to this filter cutoff over here, because we dragged it in here basically, that's how that works. We get a setup like this, where we have this modulation amount, which is our filter 2 cutoff over here, being controlled over here. And what that means is that we can set up a remap for this, meaning that we can tell it to be on all the way below here, and for the rest of the time we want it to be off. What this means is that for the lowest possible value, it is going to allow this modulation to come through to the filter, meaning that the filter is randomly moving around because this is generating a random signal. But as soon as we turn this macro up, as soon as this macro goes away from 0, what will happen is that this modulation will be disallowed and our modulation from the mod wheel will be applied instead. So that means that as soon as we start moving this mod wheel, we no longer have that random modulation, but we control it manually. So this is not something that we hear immediately when our preset just kind of plays like this. This is going to be the default state with everything turned off in the preset. So what I want to do is I want to make sure that the squelch actually comes through in its default state. So this is going to go to negative over here, minus 0.5 here. And this will have to stay in the same way, because this is just controlling the pitch modulation here. But we want the level to actually go down. So the squelch is engaged when it's on its lowest, and when we turn this up, it turns the squelch off. Okay, so that didn't work exactly the way that I expected it to. This is being controlled by LFO number 3 here. This should be going down. Actually, this should be going up. This needs to go down like that. So when the squelch goes all the way up, it lowers the level. And this is going to the level as well, which is controlled there. Meaning that this should be upside down. This may be a little bit hard to follow, I know. That's not meant to be. Okay, so it turns out what I actually need is an upside down version of this LFO on a separate LFO over here. This is where stuff like this gets tricky when you're doing patches like this. At this point, it's not something that I really want to teach in the sound design tutorial here, because this is the kind of stuff that you don't really need to do when you're just making sounds for yourself. In this case, all that I want to achieve is I want to make sure that the patch is actually immediately playable and that it's easy to understand. To understand in the sense that when you're controlling it with these things, obviously it's going to be hard to understand exactly what I'm doing if somebody opens up this modulation over here and sees it tied to the volume in a strange way. But this should work now. Okay, I can unbypass these over here. For some reason, our pitch thing isn't working. Okay, so after a little bit more experimentation, I found out how we could actually do this. As you can see over here, we have the LFO controlling the volume over here. And then the squelch just turns the volume off. And by the way that we have the shape, it's not going to play actually like this. We do have a little bit of a problem here. I do want this to go a little bit up like that. That's sounding nice. We're finally getting somewhere. The final thing is just going to be the context check, which means nothing more than just listening to it with a kick and bass and just adjusting some of the macros over here. And all of that sound design is coming from holding down just one note. Now, this is the kind of video where I just experiment and I don't really have anything like pre-planned like I do in my other videos. Over the last few days, I've seen that my other videos are performing better and better, so I'm planning on continuing to make both the kind of scripted content that you like from my channel. So that's the 10 beginner tips video, the high-tech recipe video, as well as the kick drum video. All of those were scripted in advance and it's just a new way of kind of creating a video for me. But that does take a little bit more time and I have to get used to that kind of workflow. So I need a couple of extra videos in between that I can just quickly make, this being one of them. Now, I hope that you enjoyed the sequence. The final thing that I want to show you is just how to save this as a preset. If you follow along with the tutorial and you have anything similar or another experiment that you would like to save, you just go in here. What I like to do is put in brackets over here. Let's see, these kind of square brackets here. So this is going to be a sequence. This is just nicely identifiable as quickly glancing on what it exactly is. I know they also have a category over here, but these categories don't really include all of the categories that I personally like. So something like an atmosphere or a plug is a sound that I like to identify inside of a preset pack. Because if I'm making atmospheres or I'm making ARPs, that is just the kind of sound that I'm looking for. And it's nice and easy to identify that way. Now I just have to come up with a name. I'm going to call this full grid because it's kind of like a grid synth. And then here I just describe what the module does. It's always nice to have a description of what the module is responsible for because it doesn't really have a tag like the other macros do. And it's still being used for quite an interesting modulation that the user may want to try out. Now, personally, what I would like is a few more lines in here in terms of text, because if I wanted to say what this knob is actually doing, squelch off, turn it off, you can see that it gets cut off and you cannot really see what is written there. So it's better to just keep it like this. And then people will know that if they turn up this knob, it's going to turn off the squelch because they'll just listen to it. Initially, because the module is controlling a filter that is tied to the squelch, I want the user to be able to hear both what the module is doing and what the squelch is doing. So if the default behavior is that this controls the volume upwards, the way that we had it before, where if you turn it up more and more and more, the squelch becomes apparent. What they'll find themselves most likely in is that they're going to tweak this knob, they'll hear what it does, they'll tweak this knob, they'll hear what it does, they'll tweak this knob, they'll hear what it does, and then they go over here, tweak this one, and they won't hear it change because the thing that they're tweaking is not turned on. You want to prevent these kind of things from happening in your presets, and that's why a preset can sometimes feel like very unusable. And this is one of the things that I've only been really doing recently. This is not something that you'll find in, for example, my Psychedelic Essentials Volume 1 and 2. Although this similar kind of process where I just tweak all of the parameters and see how the modulation works, and if it is all intuitive, is something that I did for Volume 3. And that's also where I'm basing it on in the way that I'm doing it over here. So now we have our final preset, which means that this is going to be the end of the video for today. Although this is a little bit of a filler video, I do still hope that you enjoyed it. If you want to support the channel, you can do so by continuing watching some more of my videos. There will be two up on the screen right now. One is my latest tutorial, that kick drum video that I talked about before. And the other is just going to be a random video that YouTube thinks you'll enjoy. So pick one and just watch, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye bye.